Hello and welcome to Lessons from the Middle podcast. I am your host, Ashley, and today we are going to be digging in to the Goldilocks parenting approach. So before we can dig into all of the strategies that I want to share on this podcast, I need to share my philosophy on parenting approaches. Why? Because all of my strategies come from this lens of the Goldilocks parenting approach. So no, I'm not another person on social media telling you to follow gentle parenting, and I am very deliberate about that. While I don't find anything wrong with actual true gentle parenting, because I'll share in a minute how I think it's really just a poor rebrand, it has really taken on so many different meanings on social media that it ends up looking more like permissive parenting, which, to stick to the Goldilocks theme here, would definitely be the too cold porridge. So, over the course of a decade of working in a high achieving, affluent, highly educated community, I have watched the pendulum swing drastically in parenting approaches and how we interact with our children. So, while this is what we do in our homes or our interactions with our kids, these approaches have a ripple effect to how our kids view themselves, the world, and the other adults in their lives. So, as we get into it, no, there is no judgment. There is no such thing as a perfect parent. I just want to have an honest discussion of these different approaches to parenting and how they can impact us and our kids' mental health. So, when we look at parenting, there are really three main approaches that we have researched: authoritarian, permissive, and the Goldilocks parenting, authoritative. Let's dig into each of these a little bit to see why there are so many benefits to be right in that sweet middle spot and how these other styles have shown up in our lives. So, authoritarian, I think this is one that we can easily understand. We know that this is the too hot porridge. Again, if we're sticking with that Goldilocks theme, for many of us millennials or older generations, this was one of the main styles that we experienced and that we saw play out in the media. So this is something that many of us and many of the parents that I am working with, we are trying to rewrite and redo now our own parenting, because this authoritarian way is kind of how we grew up. And it's the recordings, the tapes that play in our mind day in and day out as we view our kids and their behavior and our role as the adults in their lives. So when we think about an authoritarian, what we can see from this approach is that children are seen, not heard. This is that do as I say mentality. The actions we might see are these old school parenting things that, again, I am working with so many parents to undo, which are punishments, right? So these are yelling, timeout, spanking, a lot of things that are based on control and reacting to behavior. So this approach is filled with high demands, high expectations, but we are low on sensitivity and emotions and feelings. So that's kind of one end of the pendulum. And I feel like when I first started working in the schools, that authoritarian approach was very prevalent. And now I've seen we kind of skipped the middle and we swung to the other side of this permissive parenting style, which is the opposite of that authoritarian. So it is what a lot of gentle parenting has started to like. While we don't have a lot of yelling or punishments in this style, we do have other concerns that can lead to our children struggling with their mental health. So I think many times when we think about permissive approaches, we think, oh, well, we're letting our kid have freedom and we're letting them do all these things on their own and we're honoring their feelings. And how on earth could they struggle with mental health? Well, we're going to get to that. So in this approach, we will likely hear kids making a lot of choices, expressing their feelings, which again, on its own, this is not a bad thing. Our kids need to have autonomy. The issue, though, becomes when a child is in charge. And I referenced that I grew up with a little bit of that authoritarian approach. When my parents divorced, there was a lot of change that happened in our lives. And in my house, that pendulum swung to permissive because there was nobody home to monitor us or share what was going on. So I experienced this firsthand of my brother, who's 4 years older than I am, him and I being in charge. And I'm going to share why that can be kind of scary. So we see the opposite of the authoritarian approach with permissive. and that we are really low on demands, we're low on expectations, but we are high on sensitivity. So we're really caring about our kids' experience and their feelings and their emotions. Again, the hard part is when a kid becomes in charge. I will hear parents say, I want to be my kid's friend, or these kids are making really big decisions that should be adult decisions. This can be something as simple as the school has recommended a certain class for your child based on where they are skill-wise, but a kid doesn't want to do it because of friends. And so we let a kid make that big of a choice for their middle school schedule. And again, this isn't like they want choir and we're saying to take PE. This is, hey, they really need some support in reading, and this will enhance their confidence long term. And we kind of skip that and put them into German. So again, really thinking about where our kids are and that we are meeting them in the middle, not just letting them make all of the decisions. So not only are they in charge and calling the shots in this parenting approach, but they're also not learning any skills, right? While they may be able to express their emotions, they aren't learning healthy ways to express it. So when we have kids that have too much freedom and feel that they are equal to an adult, this is actually really unsettling and it doesn't provide safety, which is the opposite of what I think we all want. And if you are more geared toward this approach, your number one goal is to provide safety, right? But we can see that these kids end up struggling more with anxiety because, again, they are unsure of who is in charge of their physical and their emotional safety. And again, as a kid who grew up in this, I can tell you that I felt this so deeply. I didn't feel it as much in the moment as a kid, but as I grew up and started thinking about it, just having boundaries, having limits, expectations would have been awesome. Just to know that somebody was making choices and decisions for me, that there was an adult who was in charge and I could rely on. It's really scary. I mean, how many of us have been the adult in the room? Like you graduate from college and you start your job and you look around and you're like, I am the adult in this situation, and it feels scary. Now imagine being 9, 10, 11, realizing that you're the adult. That's really unsettling. So a quote that kind of summarizes both of these styles that I think is just kind of an interesting discussion. But the quote is, roaring like a tiger turns some children into pianists who debut at Carnegie Hall, but only crushes others. Coddling gives some the excuse to fail and others the chance to succeed. From Eilert Waldem. And I just think this quote is so interesting because temperament is a whole other discussion, which we will get into later. But based on our kids' temperament, sometimes it may seem like an authoritarian or permissive style is actually working. So I get that. It's been what we have seen play out. But there's a lot going on underneath to show us that it doesn't work. Authoritarian, our kids are too controlled, it's too intense, it's too high on expectations. We don't really seem to care as much about their experiences and their feelings. And then on the other side, again, is that permissive approach where the kids are in charge. We just want them to feel great, but we're not putting any of those kind of expectations on them either. So let's jump to the sweet spot of parenting approaches, authoritative. And this is where I say, I think gentle parenting got a poor rebrand because I think what happened is authoritative and authoritarian, very similar, very different. And I think that people were like, all right, we need to figure out a new name because this is too confusing. I even heard somebody the other day say, you shouldn't do authoritative parenting style. And then they described authoritarian. So I see this mix up and hear it all the time. So authoritative is the approach that we want to be following. And again, I think this is what gentle parenting was trying to be before it got twisted and turned in a million different directions on social media. So this approach, one reason that I also love it is that because it has decades of research to support it. So not only are we saying this is a sweet spot in the middle, but there are decades of research, which is just, I love some research. So it's a sweet spot because this approach is high on limits and boundaries and also high on sensitivity. So again, we are putting expectations in place. We are teaching our kids skills, but we are also understanding of their feelings and their emotions and their experiences. So we are right in that. I love somebody said the other day, like mundane middle. Like there's nothing maybe so exciting about being in the middle, but this is where we really want to try to be through the lens of parenting. All right, so I have a book, The Five Principles of Parenting by Dr. Lisa Pressman, and I just want to give you, we're going to do a quick quiz here, breaking out the teacher roots. I want to do a little quick quiz, and you can see kind of where you fall in this. I'm going to give 2 different scenarios. So, scenario 1, suppose you find your 5-year-old drawing a map of the universe on the wall, and you're not actually into impromptu murals. You, A, confiscate the crayons and put the kid in an hour-long timeout. B, say we don't draw on the walls, it damages them. Here's a paper to draw on instead. You help them clean it off and help them get set up with some appropriate art supplies. Or C, figure you'll repaint when you move. Kids will be kids. I think this is a great example of how you can easily tell which one is which style, right? We know A, this is authoritarian. We are putting them in that timeout. We're not even asking them or teaching them anything. It's just, we're done. C is that permissive. It's like, whatever, you did what you did. And B is, again, that sweet spot of we are understanding, we are having them learn from their mistakes, we are addressing it, and then we're moving forward on what they can do. All right, that's one. Let's do this other one here real quick. So, your child is playing on their soccer team and gets benched. You, A, force your child to practice daily for an extra hour so it never happens again. B, ask them what they might do to improve their likelihood of getting more playing time and help them determine the effort they're willing to put in on the side and follow through. Or C, berate the coach for being unfair and take your child for ice cream mid-game. Why waste your time cheering on others and feeling rejected? So, again, I love these examples because they might seem extreme, but man, I've seen all of these play out working with kids and families. And so again, A is that authoritarian. You're going to meet these expectations. I don't care. C is like, this isn't your fault. It's everybody else's fault. And let's just go. Come on. Versus B is, again, like, let's see where a kid is. Do they even want to do soccer? How do they want to improve on this? It's their experience, but we're putting those guardrails for safety. So those are just 2 examples that I love that really show how with authoritative parenting we're high on boundaries, we're high on limits, and we're high on sensitivity. Because so often I think that, and I actually have a workshop coming up on this, we think it's either love or limits, but it's actually love and limits. And that's the sweetness of that authoritative approach. So another thing to think about that has really hit home with a lot of the counselors and parents that I've been working with is that as we dig into concepts like regulation and our nervous system in later episodes, it's important to know that these other approaches, authoritarian and permissive, they didn't require our parents to think about regulation or be regulated because it's all about either reacting or ignoring. So there is no hard work of keeping yourself regulated, being able to be in control of the choice you're about to make, modeling that to our kids, right? So if we were raised from these approaches, then authoritative can feel really hard now as a parent because we are learning about these strategies such as regulation and teaching them at the same time. That's really hard. It's like you're building and flying the plane at the same time, as they say. So no worries though, because week after week, I'm going to be sharing strategies all from this lens because ultimately it is what has been proven to be the most effective for our kids, regardless of their temperament, neurodiversity, trauma, everything. So it is the most effective for their mental health and our relationship with them as their parents. So in the next episode, we are going to be digging deeper into the authoritative parenting approach, talking about how we can live this out based on your own values and personality.